can I tell you one other thing that I
Yeah,
think
yeah, yeah.
there's so many coping skills and strategies, right? Um, but there's kind of two things where I went sort of 180 completely. So being comfortable with my body, I went a complete 180, right? I'm not wearing a bra for you. Get over it, right? um, but the other thing where I went a complete 180 is because of being manipulated and groomed that way and always trying to please, I would often kind of hold back what I was thinking and feeling. And I've gone completely the opposite. I'm too transparent now. People,
Any of my brothers that are out there, struggling with their deployment or, life in general, I tell them that, hey, to stay strong and to keep holding on and to understand, you're here for a reason and that, your life and what you're doing does have purpose.
sounds good.
Hey, everyone. This is Greg Washington, and welcome to the next episode of Guards Down. Today, I have with me Tiffany Montgomery. Tiffany, how's it going?
Things are great over here. How are you?
I'm doing well. Where are you at in the world right now?
I'm in Boston right now.
In Boston. In Boston.
Yeah. Everybody always has to say it like a particular way when you tell them that you're in Boston. I find
You have to. You have to, because I
I,
mean that's what that's
universal.
what they're known for, right?
I guess so.
Well, good. Well, look, tell our listeners out there a little bit about you, your background, before we get started.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm originally from Texas. I grew up in Texas my whole life with three siblings, and I am the third in the family. So there's a lot of people that are interested in birth order. I was the smallest child for about 9 years before my sister was born, and she became the baby of the family. So we're pretty spread out. Our family has 16 years age difference from my oldest brother to my youngest sister. So we're kind of spaced out. There's four of us. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. I went to West Point, which is the United States Military Academy, and I played soccer there for a brief time before leaving the team. And then after that, I got a scholarship to attend medical school at Boston University. But on my way to Boston, I actually got in a catastrophic car accident that left me with traumatic brain injury and some spinal damage. It took me about 2 years to fully recover from that. So I only completed 1 year of medical school. And at the end of my recovery, just decided that it really wasn't the path for me anymore. So much in my life had changed. And so now I was placed on medical hold from the military because of those injuries. And then I moved into a career in biotech, and I've really liked it ever since. So now I'm doing IT support for research and development, mostly with pharmaceutical and biotech companies, but I do a little bit of work across agriculture and specialty chemicals as well. So that's
That's
what I got going
amazing.
on.
That's amazing. So I can tell everyone I got smart friends.
It's nice. It's nice to have smart friends.
Indeed, indeed. Well, look, I know that we're going to talk about what you went through, right? Going through,
Mhm.
that the car accident and the whole nine, um, and I'm quite sure that was very devastating. And I'm just thankful that you're healed, you're safe, you're still here. So just many praises to the man upstairs or the universe just for allowing us to be here, right?
Yeah.
um I did want to do one quick. She has a pet peeve, everyone, right? When she goes out to eat, you can't break the wheel in the pizza pie.
I was always doing it. It's not my pet peeve. It's not. My pet peeve is if the menu is dirty, but the soups cost more than $10. If you're going to charge me double digits for soup, you're going to give me a clean menu. Full stop. It's soup.
I hear that. I hear that.
Wheel. That's not me, guys. That's just tradition. That's just the rules. Everybody should know that.
Indeed. Indeed. Okay. Well, look, of course, the show is about trauma and grief and how we view it, how we treat it, and how we overcome. And so, I kind of want to just dig right into it and kind of
Sure.
ask, some questions. So we'll just kind of, play it by ear and just go from here wherever this conversation leads us.
Sounds
Right.
good.
So the first question that I like to ask is, you know, did your parents or someone in your family or, in your circle teach you how to deal with grief and trauma growing up?
No, they really didn't. In fact, it was kind of interesting because when I would bring something, a concern or something to my parents, specifically my mother, I would get kind of difficult. I wouldn't really get like a lot of support or advice, and it was oftentimes a lot of, well, these things happen type of comments, which weren't, I didn't find them super helpful. They didn't give me any new skills they didn't have before. Well, these things happen is not necessarily in my opinion, like any sort of like skill or coping mechanism, or even very helpful. So that was kind of the way that they would deal with things. It's like, yeah, well, these things do happen.
Hmm.
Which yeah.
What did you have to learn from that, like on your own?
I think that what I had to learn on my own, obviously skills to cope was something that I had to learn, not necessarily on my own, but I did have to learn and develop at some point. But what I felt and learned from that moment was that is an unsympathetic and unhelpful response. So what I learned is that I wasn't wrong if I brought a concern to my parents and they responded that way and it hurt me. I wasn't being a baby. I didn't need to grow up. It wasn't any of those things. That I deserved to be heard. And those responses were not very helpful, sympathetic. They weren't action oriented in any way. So there was no offer to, mitigate anything or help in any way. They were just very dismissive responses. And I had to learn that the problem wasn't me. Those were dismissive responses.
Got you. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So in having dismissive responses, it you can say it leaves us with the feeling of like still being out there, right? Like still
Yeah.
being confused and not knowing how to process it and just having to accept it, but with no understanding of what it is you're accepting,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so is the car accident the most traumatic or grieving experience that you had to deal with?
I would say that it's difficult to say. So the car accident caused what's known as like counter coup injuries on my brain. And those exacerbated or caused, hard to say because I was so young, psychiatric challenges that I had to deal with. But in terms of actual trauma, that was very much a physical trauma that took time to deal with. I think in terms of having actual post-traumatic stress, um, the traumatic event that I dealt with as a kid um, was child sexual abuse, and seeing repeated issues throughout life, um, that were really challenging, and watching the response or the non-response, the avoidance behavior, that not just my parents, but kind of society was practicing at the time in a lot of ways. And I think that's really the thing that shook me the most is all of those things. And that happened when I was much younger.
Mm-hmm.
So, the car accident was awful, and it had really devastating consequences that I had to come back from. But in terms of, but why did I have those problems afterward? It was kind of rooted in way before. Like I didn't realize that the way before stuff was what was really a problem. It was sort of exacerbated by the head injury, if that makes sense.
Yep, that makes complete sense. It really do. And so like, it makes me wonder, well, like what was the collateral damage from, the sexual abuse and also from the car accident, of
Yeah.
the people around you and as well as yourself.
So the collateral damage is interesting, right? So my parents were watching two boys, and these boys, I don't remember how old they were, but one of them was close to my age and one of them was closer to my brother's age. So um and that boy is the one that hurt me, and he might have been who knows how old. I want to say he could have been anywhere from 11 to 14 at the time. And he did really adult things to me. And the collateral damage of that is, so first of all, that's not normal behavior for a child. And if he was doing, what I've learned is, if he was doing and engaging in those behaviors, odds are someone was hurting him. I don't know who, I don't know if that's the case, right? But someone, he learned those behaviors from someone. And if it was just like playing doctor, exploring whatever, then maybe it's like just typical childhood curiosity, but it went a lot further. And there's a lot of grooming and psychological manipulation that happens in those type of situations. And he was participating in those things. He was grooming, he was being manipulative. He was like, I was a little kid. I was very small. I thought he was my boyfriend, but he was doing really weird adult things with me that were not age appropriate for me, certainly, and not for him. But then the manipulative, like, don't you love me? Like, there were just phrases that are very classic abusive, manipulative things. And, like, and also the threats about, if you tell anybody and things like this, right? So all of the classic things you hear about with people who abuse children, he was doing to me, and he was still a child. So the collateral damage, I think there's a lot, right? So first of all, we all knew each other from church. I refused to go back to church. I wouldn't go back. So I left our church as a kid, probably around the age of 6 or 7. Refused to go back, wouldn't go back, because I would see him there. So that's, destroying my relationship with that community. That's an issue. Creating conflict in my family because I wouldn't go, that's collateral damage. My parents refused to take any decisive action about it. So if now as an adult, I realized something was probably happening to that boy, whatever was happening to him didn't get stopped because of us, wasn't even looked into. So someone was hurting him, most likely, and he continued to suffer, most likely. And then it just, it spirals. It continues to go on. So then later, when something similar happens at a daycare center, and I am older now, and I demand that my parents report it, and then they don't. And it's, it becomes a thing where over time it damages my relationship with my parents because I feel like they're not doing the right thing, and I can't understand why they wouldn't protect me and my sister.
Gotcha. That is a good bit. So shoot, when we talk about it, right, you have the church community, right? You first have this push-pull on your conscience to, as a kid, how are you supposed to know like what love is completely, right?
And it was really complicated, yeah.
And then you have threats.
Yeah. It was really complicated for sure. I can't compare it to anybody else's experience, but the push-pull is a great way to describe it. So further collateral damage there is that it's that type of grooming at such a young age. It sets you up to live a life where you're desperate to please other people. Other things that it does is it gives you an inappropriate, a lot of people don't talk about this, it's extremely embarrassing, but we have physiological responses in our body to certain types of stimuli. And some of those are just biological. You could say that you don't like pornography, for example, but they've done studies where if you watch pornography and we're doing a functional MRI of your brain, we can see that you are stimulated by it, right? But it gives you an inappropriate response to, like if you're watching a film that deals with a really weighty topic that's similar to like child sexual abuse, for example, you can feel a physiologically inappropriate response to what you're seeing. And that is deeply conflicting. It's humiliating. It makes you think that you're going to become one of those people. Gives you a lot of fear. I didn't want to give my little sister a bath when I was a kid. I couldn't handle seeing children naked because I was afraid that I would become like that. And it took a very long time. And even today, I think that I'm a lot less comfortable with other people's like changing diapers and stuff. Like, I don't know. I think that I have no concerns that I no longer, as an adult, like I no longer have any concerns that I would repeat that cycle. But I think there's still like a discomfort in there in certain ways. It's devastating. And you're absolutely right. The push pull will set you up. You don't know what's right or appropriate. You don't know what love is. I was very young. I was 4 years old. And it sets you up for, future situations where people are pushing your boundaries and you're desperate to please because you've been groomed to be manipulated.
Right, right. And then you talk the aspect of the church community, right? So not only, one, you developing a relationship with a higher being, but then also, you being in a community around people that you think you can have that support
Yeah.
and, be raised to grow up, and so having all that like come to shambles and just be torn apart from it. And I mean, at such a young age to be like, yeah, I'm not going back to church. Like you kind of had to grow up pretty fast. I would believe, right?
I don't feel like I did grow up. I don't feel like I grew up pretty fast. So I don't know. I don't think that because I didn't have any help and I couldn't have honest conversations about it, I don't think that I was able to articulate these thoughts and handle this subject matter in a mature way for a very long time.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, let me ask you this, right? So we're looking at this from a cultural standpoint right now.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there is cultural differences in how people deal with, something that you went through?
Yeah, I think there are. And it's hard to say if they're probably not purely cultural. Um, I think that, I know from what I've read and what I hear that, for example, like boys are less likely to report. So we seem to think that the numbers are telling us that, more young girls are victimized than young boys, but we also suspect that that's not true. We suspect that, and when I say we, I just mean the people that study these types of things. We suspect that's not true. We suspect that boys are just very less likely to report. And that may be the case. And I think that there's a lot about being a boy and being a man and not being violated. And there's a lot of thoughts about how being violated like takes away from your manhood, right? That I think that, and I hate to put words in the mouths of an entire gender because I haven't experienced those things,
Mm-hmm.
but I can see the pressure that is placed on people, right? The pressure that's placed on boys and why they won't report. So I think there's definitely a cultural difference there. I think there is less, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like there is less oversight and less inquiry and less paying close attention to people of color. I feel like, you know, people are more likely to recognize the signs in, a little white child not behaving the same way and acting differently and being, you can kind of recognize the signs. There's things to look out for than, someone that is, Black or Hispanic.
Yeah.
I think certain communities, it's much more taboo than in others. I think, to talk about it, right? Um, I don't know for sure though, because I don't study it very closely. But I do worry that, there are those cultural differences. I think also there is a lot of, if you don't have a two-parent household, there is just less emotional energy and physical time to look after kids. If you have a big blended household with like aunts and uncles, if you have transient partners, right? Like you date one guy for like a year or two, then you date another guy or what have you, or if you just have boyfriends around a lot, I think that makes people vulnerable. So that's a different type of a cultural difference, right? Like if you're a single mom and you're having different boyfriends staying at the house, and this is no judgment at all, because you could date wonderful people, but odds are if you have, more people, just numbers game, if you
Right.
have 10 different men through your home in 10 years, there's nothing wrong with that.
You just increase the chance of something happening.
Just mathematically,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I get what you're saying. So part of it is one, the protection aspect of it, right? Having family members or enough family members where it's a two-parent household or, family support that can actually
Yeah.
watch,
Like having eyes on is
right, right.
critical. Right.
And then the other part is what are you exposing them to or who you're exposing them to?
Sure.
You definitely have to be mindful of that. So I mean, those are great points. When it comes to you specifically, what tools and techniques have you used to cope on your own, healthy and unhealthy?
Mm-hmm. I think that, so for a very long time, I had a lot of shame about my body, and I wouldn't, I wouldn't feel comfortable with anyone touching me, and I wouldn't feel comfortable with my sexual identity, and I wouldn't feel comfortable with my body at all, right? I didn't want to be seen naked. I couldn't like change in the locker room as a kid. I was very, very uncomfortable. Um, I think that getting over that was, so first off, West Point just throws you in showers with no curtains and has you running around like a lunatic trying to wash your hair. We have massive shower facilities that were designed for only men. There's no dividers, there's no curtains, there's no nothing.
Right.
And you don't have time to be upset about it. You have 5 minutes to take all your clothes off, shower completely, put things back in the room in order for it to be inspected later, get back in their uniform to stand in formation and be inspected again, like 5 minutes. And you don't have time to worry about it. So I think by sheer force of repetition of that process, I got a lot more comfortable with not caring about my body, my nakedness, whatever. So I think that being forced into situations where we're all running around and like nobody cares about your body or your hangups, we've got other missions, we've got other things to focus on, just by exposure to that for a while, like it just gets out of your system really quickly. So exposing yourself to situations where you're working so hard on something that's much more important, that these little hangups and nervous things, like they start not mattering anymore. I think it's kind of analogous to, if you're not very busy in work, in your life, if you're not doing enough with your energy, you're going to come up with a lot of things that sound like problems. But put yourself under like some real world stress, and you're going to home in really quickly on what an actual problem looks like. Like one time I got to the airport and realized that I didn't drink my latte before getting in airport security because I was on the phone. And I laughed at myself. I was like, this could be the worst thing that happens to me all day. Imagine if this actually bothered me. And it will ruin someone's day. Someone out there, that's their biggest problem today. So I guess just perspective, right?
Right,
So
right.
being able to have something that's so stressful and so important to you that you can let other stuff go.
Indeed. And that's kind of natural. And I agree with you on the West Point part of just like, being thrown in and being like, all right, you got five,
You're
10 minutes to get this done. We're not worried about body parts. Get
We're
in,
going
get
to
out.
give you so many other things to cope with that you can forget about all that.
Right, right, right. But I mean, the way you put it, like it like makes sense because it's like, you tend to forget about, some of those worries and fears and, thoughts that you have. And it's just like, I got to get this done. Like, boom, I'm in, I'm out. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's how, most missions are when you have a bigger picture or something to focus on.
Right,
You can learn to get over the little hurdles.
right.
Right. So I appreciate that. I do.
I think
So
can I tell you one other thing that I
yeah,
think
yeah, yeah.
there's so many coping skills and strategies, right? Um, but there's kind of two things where I went sort of 180 completely. So being comfortable with my body, I went a complete 180, right? Now I'm like, I'm not wearing a bra for you. Get over it, right? um, but the other thing where I went a complete 180 is because of being manipulated and groomed that way and always trying to please, I would often kind of hold back what I was thinking and feeling. And I've gone completely the opposite. I'm too transparent now. People.
Hey guys, it's Jerome. Greg and I wanted to invite you to the community that we created for the whole Guards Down family. Jump on Facebook or check the show notes for the Guards Down Facebook group. There you'll be able to find a community of folks who are committed to raising awareness about complex grief and PTSD. Look forward to chatting with you guys in the group. Now let's get back to the episode.
It can be shocking, not too transparent and like blunt and angry or rude. Just I make sure that I'm kindly and professionally communicating exactly what I think and feel when it's appropriate, right? That doesn't mean I'm giving people my unsolicited opinions all the time, but when it's appropriate, I make sure that what I'm feeling and thinking inside, I'm communicating outwardly. Because a lot of what I did in the past was feeling, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this, and going along with things. And so just being able to reverse that in small ways made it easier to reverse it in big, more important ways. So if it was like, do you want to go here? And, for coffee or whatever, I would say, not really, but I'm happy to go with you. Maybe we could try my place next time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Just always being very transparent about it because it helps me when it comes to the big stuff.
Right. No, that's good to be able to voice your thoughts and feelings. And like you said, not all the time, but definitely when it's needed and when it's relevant, to be able to do that so that you're not keeping everything bottled in. Right. Because, you and I both know once you keep stuff bottled in over time, it builds and builds and builds until
you're really going to hear exactly how I feel. You're going to be completely unprepared and it won't be fun for anyone.
Correct. So tell me, what are some of the signs that people are dealing with grief and trauma? Right? Feelings or thoughts that they would go to, anything that cues that you could visually see or, would want to tell someone so that, they're prepared.
Yeah. So do you mean signs for people to look for in themselves or for
Both.
people to look for in others?
Both. Because with this, with the raising awareness, one, there's self-awareness, and then two, you may be able to help somebody else in need that doesn't know or is trying to.
Yeah. So I had no idea. It took me a really long time to recognize what was going on with me. But one thing that I could tell from my personal experience that might be helpful, if you find yourself seeking help, right? And you go to therapy, you see a counselor or a psychiatrist or psychologist, whichever. If you find yourself seeking help and then every time you're supposed to go to talk therapy, right? Whatever form of therapy you're going to, it becomes this really stressful event that leaves you completely wiped out and exhausted afterwards. You're probably dealing with, post-traumatic stress of some sort. So in my experience with talk therapy, I would go and we would talk about things that I was dealing with. And it was a lot of retrospective, like this happened to me, this happened to me, this happened to me, kind of giving people like my history. And in those moments, I was reliving all of that. So talking about it that way, I was just reliving it and reliving it and reliving it. And I would get so exhausted. I would bawl my eyes out. I would be useless for the rest of the day. And that's maybe if you're going through like a lot, that's okay for like, a few visits or a particularly tough visit. But if it's like that every single time, I would say that's not helpful. And you should talk to your therapist about different strategies and techniques because you're experiencing, some sort of post-traumatic stress. You're reliving these events and it is just damaging you each time with no forward progress. And I wish that I had understood that before, because I think the media gives us an idea of what we think therapy should look like. And it doesn't necessarily have to look like that at all. It doesn't have to look like you sitting in a chair spilling your guts about things that are really painful. It can look like I have a hard time agreeing. It can look like telling a therapist, I have a hard time agreeing to things I don't want to do. How can I get better at that? And then learning techniques for that, as opposed to what I think, the media made me think about what therapy should look like. So I would say recognizing yourself, if you are currently engaging in therapy, then that's one thing I would look out for that I found really, really hard, and wish that I had better exposure to different tips and techniques and types of therapy. There's all different types. So I would look out for those things. The other thing I would look out for as an individual, are you in autopilot? Are you just living your life without intention? Because if you are, then you probably don't know what you want, or maybe you know what you want and you're not making any forward progress towards it. And I think that that's a sign that you're not getting the most out of your life, one way or the other. It could be because you're struggling with something. It could just be because you're not being intentional about how you're living your life. But I think for all people, whether you're going through trauma or recovery, or just trying to get more rewarding, fulfilling experiences out of life, take stock and say, am I just living in autopilot, or do I have an idea of what I want that I'm going after?
No, man, that I really resonate with that, especially, like the last part of living in autopilot and recognizing yourself, right? So once you can take a moment and step back and see, okay, well, I've been through all of this. I've tried these things, and this is what I like and this is what I don't like, and this is who I am, or this is who I want to be.
Yeah.
Right? Then you can at least pivot and move in the direction that you want to go.
Yeah.
So that's powerful. And to get off of autopilot so that you can start enjoying the things you want to enjoy. What's been the toughest part of your journey?
I would say the disruption to work, which led to disruption in my financial security. Long time ago, thankfully. But when I was first getting out of West Point, I was in medical school, and it was a huge transition, and I didn't know that I was dealing with a traumatic brain injury. So dealing with that, it exacerbated underlying depression that I had. So I have major depressive disorder, whatever that means to anybody out there. And I didn't know what all these things were coming from. I didn't know how far back it went. I didn't know how the trauma that I experienced as a kid was affecting my social skills, and that in turn was affecting my ability to work well in a team, to be a good team player. It was affecting all of my relationships, and I didn't know any of this. And I didn't have anybody around to see how sick I was getting. And I got very, very sick. Um, so I think the hardest was really getting very, very sick, not seeing how sick I was, and just getting fired from a job because I was a mess. And I had no idea that I was a mess. I didn't know how sick I was. And people who worked with me were probably like, who is this, you know, I don't want to curse, but like, who's this piece of shit that doesn't show up every day, that sometimes comes in at 11, sometimes comes in at 8, you know, really inconsistent, just really struggling, not having good awareness, not having good relationships. I was just very, very sick, and I lost my job over it twice, and got behind on everything, and just couldn't find work, couldn't keep work. I went through that for different periods of time. So I would have like a really serious depressive episode that might last 6 months. But a 6-month gap in work is long enough to get really far behind on things like rent, things like credit cards, things like that. And then, you know, you get better, you work again. But then if I had another episode, you know, afterwards. And so it's like this, I had recovered to this point, but then plunged down again, and they had to build up again. So I would say that the hardest thing was that. And then also having a mental illness and then needing to be a better person, like needing to have a better work ethic, needing to be more considerate of others, those types of things, they're not mutually exclusive. So one doesn't excuse the other, right? And they're very interrelated. So you need to fix you before you can be good for anybody else. But just because you have a mental illness doesn't mean that you don't need to also fix your behavior. But there's a tendency, I think, before you know how sick you really are, to really just think that you're a scumbag. And I just really didn't like myself. I just felt like I was useless. Like I wasn't worthy of a good paying job. I wasn't worthy of personal success. I wasn't worthy of good relationships. I wasn't worthy of friends. There was something fundamentally broken in me, and I was a scumbag. I blamed it, you know, I took it all on myself and blamed it all on myself. But it was easy to do that because there weren't people around that could see how sick I was and tell me, this isn't normal. You're not okay. And that was probably the hardest.
And I mean, shoot, you're owning your truth, right? Like you to recognize it, to go through it, and to, you know, even blame yourself for it, right? And then to say you want it to get better. That's a lot, man. That's powerful, right? Just how powerful your mind, your psyche can be in what you're doing. What I want to ask is, you know, through all of this, of course, you know, hurt people, right? So you spoke on it earlier, you know, how the younger boy might have been experiencing something at home because he had learned behavior. So that was, you know, then passed on to you. And not saying anything about that, but just understanding that you've been through so much. Have you hurt other people in the process? And if so, did you make amends, or how did you make amends?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I hurt people. I think that there are certain situations that it would be kind of difficult to make amends. I think that in my head, what seems like I was this awful person, if I were to go back to this person that I haven't spoken to in so long, they would probably have no recollection of the judgments that I was putting on myself. And so it's almost as if I don't want to make an awkward imposition to call them up out of the blue and explain something that they probably have no idea what I'm talking about. So there are cases where I feel like that, where, you know, I'm not going to dig that up or pick at that scab. Like, I'm okay moving on from that. But I think that, you know, just little things, like I was very negative. I was really negative back in that time. And someone would say something like, you know, oh, I live in this neighborhood. And I'd be like, oh, God, awful. How do you live way out there? You know, it's so unnecessary. And why would you say that? It's like, it's not nice. It's not nice. Why would I, you know, so that's what I mean. I was a bad colleague at work. You know, I would talk to people that way. You know, I was selfish. I was, you know, I was very negative, and that's not fun for anybody. I think that if I were to go back in time and say, hey, you know, I'm really sorry, I was so negative, they'd probably not remember because it's all one off. But taken in total, I remember what I was then. Each individual person probably only got like the minor sprinkling of it. So they probably have no idea what I was talking about if I went back and apologized. There are people, though, that I have made amends with, right? People that I've dated. One person that I dated for off and on for 10 years, and we hurt each other a lot. We both had things going on, but we have both gotten really, really better. And in time, we've made amends to each other in stages over time, over the last, you know, 15 years that we've been close. And we're like best friends to this day. I know that that's not the relationship I need to be in, and they have things to work on still, and vice versa, you know, but we were able to talk about the things that we did to each other and how we hurt each other and why. And I think that I was lucky to get help that I needed a little bit sooner. So I feel that I was able to model a little bit when, as I was getting better, I was helping him see how to get better too. And then he did a ton of work to get better himself.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the most cathartic things I was able to do, was to be able to admit, I did this to you and I've held on to it for all this time. And of course he told me, I knew that you did that all along, and I forgave you a long time ago. And just, you know, it's really special to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But you have to love yourself and know that you have to love yourself enough to forgive yourself in order to make amends with somebody else.
Yeah, no, that's powerful. And I mean, just hearing everything that you were saying, you know, when I first asked the question, right, you first start with forgiving yourself. There are some instances and situations where you don't necessarily need to go to the other person and ask for forgiveness. You really got, you do it for yourself,
Yeah.
right, so that you can move on. And then, you know, like you said, with your relationship, you know, for over, you know, 10 years off and on, being able to come to a common ground and reconcile, you know, all of that hurt that, you know, was dished back and forward, and just to be able to make amends, even though, you know, you guys aren't supposed to be in a relationship, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's powerful. And I definitely agree with you there. The last part of it, of you guys, you know, coming together and making amends, you know, just on that part, just with everything in general, what has caused you to correct that destructive behavior?
What caused me to? So not how I did, but what made the turnaround for me?
Yep.
I think the hardest, I think you hit a moment where you feel just such bottomless despair. And if you hit that moment and at the same time are lucky enough to feel like there's to have some energy left over, to feel like there's got to be a better way, then you're able to find the motivation to change. So in my case, I didn't need any kind of intervention. I didn't need anybody to pull me out of it. Thankfully, I was able to recognize it in myself. I did need input from other people because that helped me see how bad it was. Other people looking in and saying, here you are, this isn't, other people holding me accountable helped me recognize things. But I was lucky enough to not need any sort of intervention or anything like that. I got to a place of bottomless despair, and I tried to take my own life. And after that, I started, I let my parents know what happened, and I realized that I had so many things to live for, but the way I was living was so horrible that that death seemed like a better option. And so if I am going to go on living, I need to live a life that encourages me to stay alive. Like I need to live a life worth living. If I'm not going to take my own life, which I didn't succeed, I still have scars all over the place. But if I'm not giving up on everything, then living in misery is not going to work. I have to live a life worth living. And I had to kind of figure out what I could change. And, the first thing that you can change is discipline. It takes no skills, no intelligence to show up on time, to drink water and eat 3 meals a day, with consistency and regularity, and to do some form of exercise. It takes no skills, no nothing to be able to implement those things. And just from there, from those practices, you build into harder and harder things to fix about yourself. So I fixed the most bare bones, basic things first and built from there over time.
Indeed. I appreciate you sharing that like that. Like that touched my soul. It really did. The question that I have, and I don't necessarily know how to ask it, right? But does one have to go through that dark circle or fire to come out on the other side to want to make a change? Right?
Oh, I don't think so. No. I don't think that it's true that you have to hit rock bottom. Maybe that's true when you're subjected to some sort of physical dependency or something. I don't have experience with that, but I think that you can make that change anytime. I think you should regularly take stock and make those changes proactively. So what I do now is I write a personal mission statement, and there are some really cool thought processes, or what is it called? They're thought exercises. There's some really cool thought exercises to get to there. There's a lot of different versions of it, but it involves asking friends and colleagues what your best qualities and attributes are, identifying the things that you would want to do if you were going to die, within 6 months, and things like that, to try to home in on what do you think your purpose is in life. And your purpose in life could be to see as much of the world as possible. And that is totally fine. I don't want anybody to think that you need to have some sort of altruistic, humanity impacting sort of thing. What you need, in what I think people need in their life, is something that fulfills and satisfies you. And I think it's important to take stock of that regularly and align what you're doing in your life with what you care about. And if you're not, then what are you doing?
Yeah. Agree.
And you don't have to go through anything dramatic or terrible to say, I want to make a change. I want to improve,
Mm-hmm.
If you don't feel physically good and it's because your health is in bad shape, regularly set health goals and update them, twice a year, once a quarter, whatever. But do it proactively. Do it all the time.
That makes sense. That does. So to be proactive in your mental health when you're in a dark space is basically what you're saying.
I
I've
think
always,
actually, even when you're not in a dark space, I think we should all do it.
there we go.
Literally, I think literally everybody should be proactive about their mental health, their physical health, and the intentionality with which you're living. I
Hmm.
really do.
I agree with that. 100. I do. So in doing and being proactive, right, in your mental health, well, you mentioned earlier you sought professional help,
Hmm.
right? And so would assume that you would encourage someone to seek for help, whether it be with a professional counselor or with a life coach,
Sure.
or being able to speak to like a best friend, right?
Yeah.
So with this effort that we're pushing, my goal is to help push or help break down some of the stigmas in mental health,
Hmm.
right? And also make it aware that you as a person, you have a say in your mental health. And so I'm pushing cultural sensitive therapy, meaning that if your therapist either looks like you or has been through the same things you've been through, you'll be able to establish a connection on a much deeper level to where the treatment and outcomes will be more favorable.
Hmm.
So can you tell us about the help that you received?
Sure. So early on, full disclosure, I haven't had great experiences with talk therapy. Okay. But what I did have good experiences with were recommendations for certain medications. And then over time, I actually developed a really good relationship with my primary care physician, where if I was stable enough, which I have been for the most part of the last 10 to 12 years, I could talk to her periodically and update my mental health checklist. It's like a little survey. And she would continue to provide refills of my medication. And if that worked, great. And if it ever didn't, we had open lines of communication and she would refer me or and it was kind of like a give and take, because she could just say, like, if I wasn't doing well, she could hold me accountable and make me do more in order to get a refill of my prescription. Because I know that the medication is useful to me, but she is not going to cooperate in providing the medication if I'm not doing all the things that I need to do to take care of myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that getting help can come from a lot of different places, and you should find what works for you. And that's what I had to do. Talk therapy didn't work for me. I tried it a number of different times. Some things that did work for me were literally researching cognitive behavioral techniques, behavior modification techniques. My sister is an educator, and she learned a lot of these things and passed them on to me. And I've implemented them in my life and found them really useful. So I built a good relationship with my primary care physician, and that's been how I've really managed things for the last however long. I know other people do really well with faith-based counseling, and I think that that's a great alternative. If your faith is really critical to you and it's a huge part of your life, the way you evaluate life's questions and the way you think about what right looks like for you,
Mm-hmm.
then I would really encourage you to pursue that. There are all different types of faith-based counselors. There are licensed psychologists, people with PsyDs, things like that, that also have they have a secular practice, so they're outside the church, but they can speak to spiritual issues. And then there are those that are a part of the church community as well. So those are all great things to do. And then, you know, surely take into account if you have specific issues that you think it would help to have like, let's say that you deal with you've dealt with a lifetime of coming out from being gay. Then maybe it helps to have somebody who's been through similar experiences, either through social support by just being in a group together, just making those types of friends, or maybe you want a therapist who has similar traits and characteristics to yourself.
Yeah.
I think those are all really important things. For me, I have surrounded myself with, successful people that motivate me to stay on track. And that's been useful. And then I built a good relationship with my primary care physician, and that's been useful for me.
Okay. So with the counselors that didn't work, why do you feel like they didn't work?
I don't think it was them at all. I think it was the talk therapy technique. I don't think it was those particular counselors, and I think it was really that type of therapy is not useful for me. I think they were great. I felt very forthcoming with them. They were good at what they did. But that type of therapy wasn't working for me. I do find it interesting that they didn't realize that we weren't making forward progress and that they didn't address that with me.
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
You'd
That they
think that
did.
you would realize it, right? Like, this person isn't feeling any better week after week. So,
Well, what would you have want them to realize about you?
I mean, that the sessions were not productive, that I was just crying for like an hour a week, and then, not feeling any better week on week on week. So I think too often there is, if you're not feeling better, they want to adjust your medication, when really there's a lot of lifestyle elements that go into how you're feeling as well. And it's a combination of coping skills, and we don't really teach those, and lifestyle things like, are you doing the right things? Are you being irresponsible, and your irresponsibility is creating consequences, and those consequences are adding stress, and there's all sorts of things baked into it. But essentially, in my opinion, I was not progressing at all week after week after week, and just feeling really miserable going into therapy. But I mean, my view of things is just one view. So yeah. I would have hoped that they saw that those sessions were just way too traumatic for me, and would have made some sort of adjustments.
Right. So for you, you wanted them to have helped you address like your coping skills and lifestyle changes. Is
Exactly.
What you're saying?
Yeah. Instead of reliving horrific moments of my past, I think that would have been more productive.
Got you. Okay. That makes sense. What advice would you give your younger self?
Oh, goodness.
Or
the advice I would give my younger self is to never feel like a victim. Don't ever feel sorry for yourself. Because I think a lot of times I felt like things were happening to me, or people were doing things to me, without being able to realize how my negativity, the way I talked to people, the way I interacted with people, was creating that. So now I always look inward before, when something's not going well, I look at,
you project outward.
Yeah, I look inward, like, what did I do to lead to these outcomes? Or what could I have said that might have created that response? Or, I look inward first, and I look inward without judgment, right? And maybe judgment's warranted, but I start without judgment until I kind of find out what I think happened there that I had responsibility for.
Got you. Would that be the same, the advice that you give yourself, would that be the same coping skills and things that you would treat, your kids one day?
Oh,
or what would you teach them?
Gosh, kids, I think I'm going to have to do a lot of research before I teach kids anything. Let me put my glasses on and get some books out. Like, isn't it terrifying? Isn't it terrifying that we're going to screw them up? I still don't have any. It's terrifying. No, I think that being able to look inwardly and say, what have I done, and think about your role in things first is good. And to do that without, to first calm yourself down so you can think clearly, then think clearly about what you did that might have contributed, ask questions, and be interested in the answers. Those types of skills I think are useful for diffusing situations and coping with things. Yeah. Learning to accept what you can't control. I know a skill that I've taught a lot of my friends, not like a novel idea at all, is when you're freaking out about something, draw like a little T chart on the on a piece of paper, and on the left-hand side, write down all the things you can change about this situation. On the right-hand side, write down all the things you have no control over. And for the things you have some control over, what can you do today, tomorrow, next week, and by the end of the month to address those? And what you can't control, how are you going to make peace with it, right?
I like that. Indeed. The T chart. I like that.
Just really simple. It helps me feel like, okay, I can do these things. I got this I can do. Well, I have no control over that. So it's hard to like parse all that when you're overwhelmed. So that's why I think writing it down is useful.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, with that, we're going to wrap up. Are there any resources or any shout outs to anybody that you would like to give that could be helpful, or, any ventures that you're dealing with that, you would like people to know or share?
I think that, one of the great things that I've had is Boston Sports and Social Club, Boston Ski and Sports Club. I don't know. It's BSSC, but it's a really great adult league, and they run a bunch of leagues, basketball, soccer, or whatever. I've been able to play soccer now for 32 years, thanks to programs like theirs. And that just gives me a really good opportunity to make a bunch of friends in a purely physical playing kind of way. Just being able to play at this age is so nice. So I think that's been really beneficial in my life. So I just, big shout out to all of those adult, co-ed league programs out there. Those are great. And I think it's really important to be able to do that and make friends that way. And I have been really appreciative of people like Allison Sabone, who I believe she's Allison Sabone Rhodes now, who is a yoga practitioner and very, very good medical professional, always willing to lend a kind ear, very understanding, and is always checking in on you if she's concerned, even if she feels silly doing it, which is so noble and so hard to do. It is easy to be too embarrassed to check in on a friend because you don't want to make them uncomfortable, but she does it anyway. So, good for her. And then also Josh Montz, our classmate as well. Josh is great. I have talked to Josh a couple of different times about things that I'm dealing with, and he has given me excellent advice that has prevented me from putting myself into what would be like miserable situations. So he's given me great leads on alternatives to like inpatient psychiatric ER. Like if you're pondering inpatient psychiatric ER because you're like really stressed out and going through something, he will talk you off of that ledge and give you some alternatives that are way better than that. So really, really good. He knows so many people that have great resources. So I'd love to mention him as well.
Yeah, no, that's great that you have a strong support system and people around you that care, and that, you pushed and endured. You see the growth in yourself looking back on everything?
Oh yeah. I was a terrible person. I'm at least halfway terrible now. So that's huge change.
Well, that's good in my book.
Improvement. 100%
Okay.
improvement. I'm not good with percents.
Well, any last words of wisdom or encourage you would want to offer someone out there that might be going through?
Last words of wisdom. It gets better. It really does. And you can't see it in the moment. You just can't. You can't. It gets better. It really does. And it's not going to feel like it'll ever get better, but it will. And I know that even today, like I have impulsive, intrusive thoughts about suicide. And I just remind myself I have a handy list of things that I'm desperate to do before I die. So I'll just stop and go, you know what? I haven't been to Kilimanjaro yet. I've never been to Bali. And I just remind myself, like, got to do that. It could be people you care about. It could be anything. I like to, things that invoke a good visual for me are useful. That's why I think I gravitate towards that instead of people. Also, people make me feel guilty if I think about people I'm leaving behind. But for me, I have a handy list of just dreams that I have that I can call to memory at the last minute that help me remember that there are so many things to live for and that it does get better. And I remind myself about all the amazing things I've done between the time between today and the time that I try to take my own life, and how none of those would have ever happened if I didn't make it through.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, keep me in mind the next trip you take.
Always.
I haven't been to Kilimanjaro nor Bali.
You can come, bring family, bring friends.
Indeed.
As soon as the parks are open again.
Exactly. Yeah.
No idea what's going on. Don't come now. In fact, stay 6 feet away.
All right. Well, look, everyone, this is Tiffany and Gray with Guards Down. We are telling you to stay safe, stay focused, and stay engaged.
Bye, guys. Take care.
That's what it's really all about. You know, giving yourself a fighting chance to just show what you got.